We are
We have
live,
two
yes.
episodes. Yeah, we have two episodes left. We're gonna do what the fuck we want to do. Yeah, we're gonna talk about David Lynch and Mulholland Drive. Of course, that's the thing to
Deservedly
get you all
so.
here. But like, fuck, we're gonna talk, okay? And so join
We'll let in a
us.
little bit more light here.
Okay, I'm going full Uncle Austin. So I'm embracing the fact that I'm in my 40s now. And so this is for all of you under 35s, particularly under 30s out there. Come along the journey with Uncle Austin. My biggest pet peeve in recent years, and I talk about this with Raymond a lot on Cinemathology, and I've been craving mature artistic expression. And I feel like the reduction of everything to branding, marketing, social media, the new algorithm, like making content so that it's also digestible while people are on their phone, on Netflix, like these initiatives. Outside of that, pop music, it's all about like live this night like you're never gonna die and we're just young and all this shit forever. Listen, there's a book out there by Susan Neiman, who's a philosopher, and it's called Why Grow Up. And while I love Susan's work as a philosopher, it's great, blah, 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 blah. I'm not gonna shit on her work. The value of growing up in maturity is something that when you live in a culture and an age that wants to just perpetually keep everybody young, two things. One, it sends off alarm bells in my head. Why is it that everyone is saying the same shit about staying young? Now, I'm not saying that youthfulness isn't wonderful. You know, there's that old adage that youth is wasted on the young. The point of that is that like all the energy and the vim and the vigor and stuff like that, but you don't know shit. Like, goddamn, if only you could be 70 and still have that, like, you know what you know, but still have that same gumption, like that would be fucking awesome, right? But so there's a lot of discussions about this, but my whole thing is there's something about a culture that is trying to keep people in perpetual Peter Pan syndrome. So one, alarm bells should be going off, especially if you're critical thinkers, right? Why is that? Why is everybody saying the same shit over and over and over again? First of all, it's just not interesting. Second of all, it makes me think that everyone's like fucking brainwashed. It's mimetic, right? And I'm always like, why are we all saying the same shit? And third, it should make you think, is there some sort of thing about the larger social system? Now, on a channel that likes to talk about critiques of capitalism and try to argue for a better way to live, which as we say, we're not getting political, as Michael always likes to say. We just want people to fucking be happy and to like live full, robust lives of self-expression and love and acceptance. Like, that's not political, man. That's just like, we just want people to like love each other and live in a world where we can like pursue our artistic or creative or intellectual or inventing innovative ideas. Like, even if it's just you want to build a fucking family and make cheese on your little cottage fairy farm, then fucking I'm all about that shit. Whatever. Okay, all this to say, there's something nefarious going on about just trying to perpetually reproduce a society that wants to keep everybody young. So my alarm bells critically go off on that. Other thing I want to say is it seems to be very fucking Western. Like, why is it that Western civilization is all in on this youth forever thing? There's something about European culture, post-Enlightenment, that doesn't value wisdom, maturity, aging. So then again, it makes me think, oh, so it's also historically contingent. It didn't always used to be this way. There are other cultures and societies that value and that prize the elderly, the age, the wisdom of ages, right? We don't do that. What do we do with our old people? We stick them in fucking retirement homes and we coddle them, and they're either cute or they're fucking nuisances, but they're never like the central integral component of our society that's passing down wisdom to the next generation, right? Fuck that. New, innovation, the novel, blah, blah, blah. That's what matters for us. So all that to say, my big thing has always been, in recent years, has been trying to just find mature resources in art and culture. And now that I am middle-aged, I'm 41. I mean, I know I don't look it, maybe with my beard and my gray, but I'm old man. I'm getting super peppery there, yeah. But I'm a 41-year-old man. I'm gonna be 42 in 2 months. So I'm uncle, and I'm actually literally an uncle. I'm Uncle Austin. I'm uncle. I'm uncle. Yeah, that's gonna be my fucking brand. So I'm uncle. All that to say,
some last minute show me the meaning merch. I'm uncle now.
I'm uncle.
What does that even
You know how
mean?
it was like a few years, like last a couple of years, it was like daddy was the thing. Uncle is my brand,
Unk.
you know, not daddy. Unk. Yeah, yeah. Well, the Unk is Shannon Sharp. Shannon Sharp is Unk, you know? So like I can't take away from Shannon, but I'm uncle. And Uncle Austin wants to just encourage you out there to seek depth in wisdom, to seek seek the deeper integral components of life and wisdom and spirituality. Hi, my love. My wife just came in. I'm wife guy too. I'm uncle and I'm wife guy. Um, Seek the deeper aspects of life, spirituality, the economy. Like, let's not just accept the bullshit that we're fed on mainstream culture and media and arts, et cetera, right? Because we're all gonna fucking die. The universe is gonna burn up in heat death in 5 billion years or some shit like that anyway. So at the end of the day, let's stop holding on to the like bullshit, small-minded shit that like tethers us to this earth, and let's transcend and try to seek greater, richer ways of living. Now, all that said, we're going to talk about fucking movies today, and I'm going to hand it over to Raymond because I've just been on a fucking rant here. But we got 2 episodes left. I need y'all to know that we love you, we appreciate you, and I think the Wisecrack audience are in on this. But if you're a straggler who's come in somehow and you floated in and you're like, what the fuck? Who's this uncle guy? What the fuck is he talking about? Come on. Come with us. Seek depth, seek wisdom, seek maturity. And I will say this, fuck it, I'm gonna plug it. You know what I'm gonna start doing? I'm gonna start making some fucking videos where Uncle Austin is going to be talking on his YouTube channel about philosophy, politics, and movies. My goal, I've already talked out. I got Jared from Old Wisecrack that's going to come talk about movies with me. I got Michael from New Wisecrack that's going to talk about politics, society, and shit like that. I'm going to start reaching out to my network of people. I'm going to have filmmakers. Obviously, Raymond and I are going to be chatting shit at some point, whether it's on Cinematology or whatever. We're going to make that shit happen.
We haven't discussed this, Austin. I'd prefer if we talk about it.
It's going to happen. I will. The money will be right. We will make it work. And we're gonna have some chats. I got friends and family. I got colleagues. I'm gonna get academics on there. Like, do you know how many brilliant? So I got a friend here. So she's the former head of scripted at one of the biggest networks here in Australia. Her name's Julie Eckersley. She's like a really brilliant, innovative thinker in the space of television in particular. She's also been a producer for a huge production company here called Matchbox years ago. She's a brilliant thinker about like innovating the screen industry, right? She's now doing a PhD in a media and communications department, and she's kind of left the screen industry, at least from like, she's like, I don't want to chase commissions anymore, because she was a commissioner at this broadcaster. She's like, I don't want to do that shit anymore. She wants to be like a thought leader now. And one of the things that I think she's going to come running up against, and I've started to see it a little bit, is just how slow academia moves and how small. She was like, yeah, it was this event that our university organized, and they were so excited, and it sounded so amazing, and it was like world-leading research, and there were like 20 people there. And I was like, yeah, Julie, I have spoken at conferences where like I've had 6 people in the audience on a panel that I've been at. Or, you know, I'm like, academia needs the help to get out in the world. So one of the things, I'm going to get some fucking nerds on the live stream, and people that I know who are absolutely brilliant and who are really great communicators, but they don't know how to get their They write all these books that 10 people will ever read, that 2 people will read their articles. They need to be heard. So I'm going to get people, Lisa Adkins and Martine Konings and Melinda Cooper and fucking Chris Seeley and all of these fucking great, brilliant people that you're like, who the fuck are they? Yeah, who the fuck are they? Some of the brilliant leading minds in the world. And we're going to fucking have some chats. So anyway, go to my fucking YouTube channel. I've got some old videos that I did in the past. Those were like edited videos. I was trying to do the fucking edit video essay thing. That takes too fucking long. Not gonna do fucking edit shit. I'm just gonna talk. This is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do it. Maybe I'll do a live stream. I have 2,000 subscribers. If there's 2 people that join me, I don't give a fuck. Because you know that this is proving that I don't need a fucking interlocutor. I can just fucking go for it. So I'm just gonna fucking go for it. And if I have someone that's an interlocutor, great, we'll have a discussion. What do you want to talk about, Raymond? Before we get into Mulholland Drive.
I'm funny happy to just listen. This is you know, I think as you said there, we're coming down to it. Second to last episode of Show Me the Meaning. And you said, I think right before we went live, you told Henry, you're like, we're gonna do whatever we want. And it's like, well, I guess what we want to do is just sort of talk. Yeah.
Real quick, they are asking in the chat for Austin's YouTube channel if you want to shout
Austin Hayden.
Okay, I'll look it up.
Austin Hayden. Austin Hayden, check it out. I've got some old videos up there where I did some like analyses. I did one on like Jordan Peterson. I did one on like the wealth of nations, like how do we understand what a nation state even is, but using like contemporary research, but try to do it in like a fun, quick, edity kind of way. I did one on like I did one on like white privilege, because the people on one side are like, "Hey, there's no such thing as white privilege. We don't want it." And then I'm like, "Well, how about we try to like let's be patient about this and not be judgmental. Let's think about what it could mean without being like I'm just whipping myself and self-hating, because I don't think that that's what it means either, right? It means being fucking great. It means being aware of like power asymmetry and power dynamics and history and how things reinforce those tendencies, right? In social science, we refer to it as path dependencies. You're on a particular path, and those paths are carved out, and it's really hard to create new paths. That's really what we're talking about, right? So I talked about that kind of shit. I got a bunch of videos up there. You can check that shit out. Talk about love and dating and sex on one of my videos, using some philosophy from Alain Badiou and Byung-Chul Han, favorites on Wisecrack. Oh, yeah, dude. Got steamy. But like I said, I got a video on there with Jared from Old Wisecrack where we like ranked the greatest actors of all time, and that's just bros hanging out talking about fucking nerd shit. So like, but
I hope that stayed positive. You didn't rank. Did you rank the least great actors of all time?
Yeah, who's the worst? Who's the bottom?
Yeah, who's the worst? Who's the
I don't remember. Yeah. Like, did he throw? Maybe Tommy Wiseau got thrown out. No, I don't know. We tried to make it, but it was basically like, hey, is Sean Penn God tier or is he like A tier? And it's like debating. Like, and here's I'll give you my take on this. When I was I've talked about this with Raymond. When I was in my teens and my 20s, I'll tell you what I had hanging on my wall. I had a Phantom of the Opera mask, which I still have. It's in the other room. Because I grew up a musical theater boy, and all I wanted was to be the Phantom on Broadway. That was like, as a kid, that's all I wanted. So I had a Phantom of the Opera mask, and then I had a James Dean poster over my bed. Okay? Now, this should tell you very much about my psyche.
James Dean gone too soon. We never got to see his Phantom.
We never got to see his Phantom, one of the great tragedies of fucking celebrity. But I was obsessed with like the Marlon Brando kind of mid 20th century, like what I would call bravura acting, right? Like dudes that are like powerhouses. And I think you see someone like
effortless cool.
Yeah.
Well, no, I not effortless. Like Paul Newman is
Paul
like
Newman,
the effortless.
I was about to say. Yeah.
That's because we talked about him on. That's the effortless. No, this was more like the effort. Like you can see the work behind a Marlon Brando. You can see the work behind a Daniel Day-Lewis.
All of his actor veins popping out. Yeah.
That's right.
It's maybe a little bit more showy. Yeah.
Sean Penn for me, after like Mystic River, I Am Sam, 21 Grams, like that was like my shit. Dead Man Walking, like those were the films that I saw, and I was like, that's the pinnacle of acting. So in my 20s, I was obsessed with Sean Penn. I actually told my wife the other day, I confessed her something that I don't think I'd ever told her. I said, when I was like 19, 20, 21, one of the acting exercises, I'm doing air quotes big time, that I would do is I would smoke weed and I'd get as high as I possibly could. And I would go into my bedroom and I would practice just crying and like breaking down crying just to see if I could do it. Because I thought that was like the pinnacle of what it meant to be a good actor, was to see if I could just fucking cry on command.
Cry.
Yeah. And I'd see how deep and like fucked up I could make myself feel, right? And so all this to say, like, I'm not saying that Sean Penn does that, but for some reason I tie my experience to learning the craft of performance to this, who I was idolizing at the time. So in the actor tier, would Sean Penn be considered like a God tier actor, or is he like A tier? And it depends on where you ask me, because as an older man now, the things that I value in a performance or as an actor, and we didn't talk about actresses on this list. We were scheduled to do the 100 greatest actresses. This list was just actors, and we were going to do actresses later.
Just for the boys. Yeah.
Yeah. But the criteria that I use now to be like, that's fucking God tier, it changes. And so that was kind of the debate that we were having, like where do you put a Sean Penn? Where do you put a Daniel Day-Lewis? Where do you put a Jack Nicholson? Where do you put a Paul Newman? Like that kind of thing.
Yeah, and this also comes with a big keeping side of art is subjective, and what is a good performance for this person may not be a good performance for that person, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. And everyone, not only is art subjective, like there are going to be certain things that you respond to. Like you and I can have a conversation where, oh yeah, we both agree that this is great, but we might like it for different reasons or whatever. Um, really getting like down to the basics on this second to last episode.
Yeah. What you like is good. You like vanilla ice cream, and I like chocolate ice cream.
I actually think this is kind of an interesting segue into Mulholland Drive, though, because this is a film that very consciously and pointedly has a more sort of elevated kind of artificial sense of style, not only with regards to the visual aesthetic, but a lot of the performances are very clearly being sort of directed in, and this is not the only one of David Lynch's projects that you could say this about. He has a sort of penchant for that kind of like elevated, almost what's perhaps the word for it? Not necessarily operatic, but there is something melodramatic about it. You know, you see it in a lot of the 50s films that serve as influences for him, where performances are just a little bit more swoony, they're a little bit more big, they're a little bit more performy, for lack of a better word. So what is the that brings up the question of like what constitutes a good performance in a movie full of like very consciously showy performances. Like,
well, it's like I told you,
about understanding the assignment and kind of like giving yourself to that experiment.
You see what the script can hold. You see what the project can hold, and I think that there is the great balance between like the story and, let's say, the execution of the story is like walking that line between, are you going to break it and go over into melodrama or over the top, or it was just a hat on a hat like Michael Bay? Maybe it's just one too many moving cameras and one too many explosions, maybe it was fucking Pitch Perfect. I don't fucking know. Some people fucking go watch the Bayhem. That's right. Like there are some arguments that would say more is more. A hat on a hat on a hat, you know? But still, you see what it can hold.
Go ahead.
And Henry was going to say something too.
Oh, yeah, sure, go ahead, I think it takes too that question of like subjective performance and what it can get away with in the performance, and just extends that into a very thorough question. You know, what is believable? What does it mean to believe something? And you know, bigger questions about truth, subjectivity, and how easy it is to make something felt in another way. This movie's the trick of an honest magician. It tells you what it's going to do. And when it tells you what it's going to do, it's telling you it's the silliest sounding, most unbelievable premise. But then it executes it. It does exactly what it told you it was going to do. You may not realize it on first watch or even second watch that it already told you everything it's going to do when it does it. But then it does it, and it still shocks you and amazes you. And it's just a testament to, you know, you can summarize a movie, you can summarize a piece of art, but it's not the same as witnessing it firsthand. You know, people always cite something like Blue, who I can't remember the name of the exact artist. It's the famous painting where it's just a wall of blue, and you know, to see it on the screen or be told what it is, you know, there may be some skepticism or some criticism, but then to see it in person and just how massive and consistent and solid and all-encompassing it is, it overrides you on some level. And Mulholland Drive just constantly does that. It's kind of a testament to how like movies can lie to you, even if you don't believe you can be fooled by them.
Yeah, I think the famous Winky's diner scene at the very beginning of the film,
it tells you the whole fucking. That's it.
Yeah. Exactly, has been memed to death. Like that's a scene that, you know, I think Austin and I have talked about this a lot, probably over on Cinemathology, that how like the memification of certain movies does kind of rob them of something essential at times. The Winky's diner scene is a sequence that proves that so conclusively, Henry. Your point, not that it was robbed of something essential.
You're aware that this is the famous movie where the thing happens.
This is that scene, and then they spend 80% of the scene telling you exactly what's going to happen, exactly how it's going to happen, And the dread is derived from the fact that it does. That there is like an inevitability, there is a gravity to this that cannot be escaped from.
And I know we're kind of not we haven't delivered a lot of tangibles to the audience that really explain what Mulholland Drive is or is about, but I just want to get one more thing in before
Get used to it.
we revert. Yeah. What you're talking about, the dread that it's going to happen, that it's not going to turn away, that is, to speak of like 50s movies, an old horror movie trick that I rarely see employed today. But if you watch the original The Haunting, for instance, it can't do like sleek jump scare, like super tight post Saw, stylized horror. But what it does is it builds this sense of dread where you want the camera to cut away from what's going to happen, and the camera doesn't. The takes will keep going. You are dragged along on this ride, and you really wish the movie would cut away or like jump scene. And that's kind of a lost art. And I feel Mulholland Drive, the Ouija scene in particular, is very great at that.
I think one of the things I saw, I watched I just watched an interview with David Lynch, who, he's notoriously, hesitant to reveal, like what he's doing and any secrets behind the sauce or anything. But one of the things he constantly says is, he just passed away. I mean, we should mention this. But one of the things he constantly said was, an audience is supposed to immerse themselves in the viewing experience. And what he did was he made worlds. Mm-hmm. He created worlds, and he wanted it to wash over you. There's a childlikeness in his approach to not only crafting the stories behind things, but in the fantastical elements. And I think that there's both maturity, because I think he also is somebody, if you know this about him, he's a lifelong practitioner of TM, Transcendental Meditation, and he's a lifelong seeker of understanding the human condition and the human psyche. And he's fascinated by that, which comes with a lot of exploration and growth and depth and wisdom. So this goes to kind of what we were talking about earlier about being mature. But what I was saying also at the top ties into this film, because it doesn't mean that there isn't the capacity for childlike wonder. Because childlike wonder and youthful curiosity can actually be quite mature if wedded to wisdom, rather than just simply judgment or going through the motions or understanding the status quo, which I actually think is actually quite immature. And so I think when you look at this, you also see a very profound exploration of the dream of Hollywood from the perspective of someone's psyche who is trying to wrestle with who he is and how he wants to be in the world as somebody who's also been burned by the studio and by TV networks, who has learned some fucking lessons, but still has this dream. He still has this hope. He still is seeking for purity. And so he creates this entire fantastical world that is both truth and falsity, but he does it in a way that I think is so magical that it invites you in, but it's also a little bit what's the word I'm looking for? It's difficult to access, not inaccessible. I think Inland Empire is more inaccessible, yes. But Mulholland Drive, it's still a little bit, abstruse. There's something there that's
so when I call
opaque, maybe.
Yeah. So when I bring up that honest magician, I think of all of Lynch's movies, it's where you can learn to really understand what he's doing, since he is giving you these setups that he then within the same context flips around. He's kind of giving you a crash course on like, okay, this is like, take for example the scene she has to rehearse. It's complete cornball nonsense when the film first shows it to you. Yeah. But then the actual performance of it, it's all there in the acting, in the pace of the cut, in the direction, just the way the movie knows like it can lie to you and make you realize you've been lied to. That's just,
the movie is like deconstructing the idea of how movies work,
right?
In a way of like, demonstrating like how much of this is a manipulation. It's not just performance, not just dialogue. Like so much of it is predicated on our understanding of how different focal lengths affect your emotion.
And so because it's telling you what it's going to do in that way, it's kind of a Lynch glossary in a way like Inland Empire or Lost Highway. kind of just drops you in the deep end without the vocabulary and expects you to kind of like learn the language or just sit with it until you absorb the language. It's kind of a nice Lynch movie in that way.
There's also
Let me ask you
something
this, Raymond.
beautiful. Oh, 1 second, Austin.
Yeah.
Hold that thought. Just to put a button on that audition scene is something that you were saying, Austin, about how he's presenting this sort of idealized version of the scuzzy underbelly thing that is perhaps revealed in the final 20 minutes and throughout in certain vignettes. Right down to the fact that, like, when Naomi Watts goes into that audition and they're giving her the, oh, can we do it nice and close and da-da-da-da-da, and you are seizing up the tension surrounding that notion of, like, oh, she's gonna get fucking assaulted and harassed and abused and ba-da-da-da-da. But of course, in this fairy tale version of the industry, that impulse still exists to harass and abuse, but she is, through like the purity of artistic expression, capable of jujitsuing that
Yeah.
and using it to create something that is not just beautiful but devastatingly so, in a way that like shames the people in the room for what they were intending to do. And then she glides out of the room completely oblivious to what they were intending to do until the other women tell her, like, oh, yeah, sorry, he put his mitts on you, da-da-da-da. And she's like, oh, I thought we were just doing the scene. Like, I think there is something beautiful about this film that very pointedly separates innocence from naivete. That I think often those are seen as synonymous or at the very least kind of overlapping. And this is a movie that is basically like, no, what if someone could just be purely talented and like purely gifted in a way that is not like, that does not, maybe it puts a target on her back, but it also diffuses that same bomb. Like like there's something extraordinary about that she never truly becomes prey in the film, and it's all because of like the same purity that makes her seem like an easy mark.
Well, on another level, my read is, that is her perspective fantasy on like her time in Hollywood, and it is like in her dream self imagination of herself, like she's just that damn good, and like it's interesting because you bring up that there's still the threat of predation because even in your fantasies, like there needs to be that danger for you to overcome and like
be some tension,
to
some
be
conflict,
so like rightfully righteously like chosen for the role. And yeah, the difference between naivete and I'm sorry, what was the split you said, Raymond?
Innocence.
Like innocence or purity, yeah.
Yeah, it's something as you come back to the movie, you wonder more and more about, knowing that like this is a constructed story. She's selling herself in her self-delusion to kind of cope with what happened. To what
that's the other thing is that is kind of like the accepted or most popular interpretation of the film. Watching this movie, this is the first time I've seen it.
Okay.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask. Yeah, I'm excited to hear your first impressions.
I mean, I've never not liked a David Lynch film, but I'm always very, very careful about how I approach his work because I don't want to ruin the first viewing. Like this is a filmography I have been very slow and very deliberate about engaging, and at the risk of sounding pretentious, I almost let his work approach me rather than the other way around, where like sometimes it just gets to a point where you're like, okay, I remember when I think I was 17 or 18 years old when I watched Eraserhead, and it was like I had spent 4 or 5 years really digging into movies, and then you start to reach that point where you get to some of the cult stuff and some of the underground stuff and some of the more esoteric stuff. And that was a movie that seemed like, okay, this feels like the tip of that particular iceberg. And so it just kind of came into my life sort of organically. I kind of feel the same way about Blue Velvet and Eraserhead and Dune, or excuse me, Elephant Man and Dune. That all three of those films as well, his first 4 movies, which I had seen all of, those all just kind of like found me at the right place at the right time, and I was ready to engage with them. And this is one that I kept kind of putting off and putting off, not because I wasn't eager to see it, far from it. I was very much looking forward to it. But it's, it's 2.5 hours long. I had heard it's very dreamy. It has a certain reputation. I wanted to be in a headspace where I could engage it without the risk of like, okay, am I going to get caught up in the dreaminess of it and maybe start to get a little drowsy? That happened the first time I tried to watch The Double Life of Veronique, where I was just like, well, this is a moving picture, this is a moving dream. Like I'm out.
Yeah.
So there were just little things like that where I was just like, I want to be sure that I can give it the attention it deserves. So much so that I was kind of resentful of the fact that I had to like rush into a watch for this podcast because I finished it like 20 minutes before we started podcasting. But also, I don't think that really took away from the experience. Like, I'm looking forward to watching it again under different circumstances. But B, in some ways, I'm kind of glad that the Band-Aid got ripped off. Otherwise, I could have kept like mythologizing this and pushing it off and waiting for a time that would never come. But as a first-time viewer, I really dug it, and I was kind of struck with Henry. Was this at the beginning of the show or right before we started streaming that you talked about your relationship between this and The Shining?
That was before stream, but yeah.
Okay. The movie I was thinking of, it's funny you brought that up because I could not stop thinking about 2001: A Space Odyssey during this.
Okay.
Just because I know that Lynch has been or was always very reticent to discuss the meaning of the film or to decipher it or give you. I guess there are some like hints that he put into a DVD sleeve or something like that I read on Wikipedia.
Yeah, I think the text itself tells you what it is. A lot. I think
Bingo.
I think Lynch does that a lot. A lot of the times people will go like, "Oh, something's Lynchian because it's obscure and weird and abstract and I don't understand it." It's like, no, Lynch is just very literal. If you say out loud what you're seeing on screen, it'll usually cohere into some sort of idea.
And
I mean,
I kind of. Oh, sorry. All I was going to say is like that's what made me think of 2001 so much is that like that's another film that has this reputation as being like completely indecipherable and it's just purely experiential and da 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 da. But then if you read the script for that movie, it's just like, nope, the monolith moves evolution forward, and that's what's going on at the end there. And he's in a human.
See, here's the thing:
I've
never thought that 2001 was inaccessible. Right. Because go ahead, Henry.
Whether you think that or not, it has that reputation, is what I'm saying.
No, yeah.
I agree with you that it's like a fairly literal textual read of it. You're kind of like, yeah, it totally makes sense.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm right there in believing that 2001's a pretty literal read. I was going to bring up that screenplays in general are really good at showing you how literal a lot of like esoteric movies are. I'm actually a huge fan of Christopher Nolan's screenplays because it tells you everything right there for how like. Everybody's like, oh, it's so convoluted and complicated and internal. It's like, no, it's plainly stated in the text. It's like,
shout out to reading fucking screenplays and fucking plays. Like I tell my students this all the time. So I still teach acting every once in a while, and I tell my students this all the time. Like whether you're a writer, director, actor, you want to be a producer, costume designer, I don't give a fuck. Read fucking screenplays. Read them.
Yeah.
Read plays, read them, especially if you want to be a performer, because like you get so much insight and understanding behind some of the kind of more like what we might call like distracting flourishes that you get when sound and visuals comes through.
And so because they're also like, especially screenplays are designed for, the crew to be able to break down, like they typically prioritize and highlight like what's like meaningful and takes priority as far as visual symbolism and such goes. Just aside from that, though, so 2001, I never found it ambiguous, but I've always felt a bit annoyed by The Shining being called that with the blowjob scene, just because I think there's a very specific within text meaning for that scene.
The guy in the dog costume?
Yeah, the guy in the dog costume. I think it's referring to, and this is a theory I've seen others postulate online. This is by no means original me, but it's alluding to some past, like it may not have explicitly happened, but Wendy may be dreading that at some point Jack sexually abused Danny in some way. It mostly has to do with Tony being the little boy who lives in Danny's mouth. And when Danny is speaking with Tony the first time we see him, the way he's framed in the bathroom, leaning over the sink, it's very much framed the same way the man leaning over into the other man's lap is later down the line when Wendy sees him. I find that a very intentional visual pun in my reading.
I think one of the really valuable skills as a viewer that we can also take to any sort of, whether it's a still piece of art or a moving piece of art, is just let it be what it is. And what I mean by that is let it wash over you. And this whole fucking podcast called Show Me the Meaning. Let's peel back the layers and let's see if there's like psychoanalytic or social or cultural or whatever hidden meanings. I believe in the depth that is hidden and that we can access by intertextual reference. But I think that maybe the best way to get into those depths and start opening those doors is to just kind of, in a way, be superficial and let what's on the text be the fucking text. Yeah. And just that's your first point of contact with it. Don't try to be always looking for some sort of representational meaning, like, oh, the dog represents this, and just kind of take it in its context of all the images that have come together on the screen right before you, and then take that as your first point. And then you can kind of start doing the kind of like scratching beneath the surface.
I think when you approach Eraserhead, Austin, with that sort of mentality, it becomes it's very obviously a movie about a man who knocked up a lady and didn't want that child and all the anxiety.
He feels super anxious about it.
That's right.
And it becomes a very funny movie if you just kind of like just sit there and take it in as what it is. Like, don't think about like, what's this trying to say about so-and-so, or like, what was Lynch like?
And that's the childlikeness that you get in Lynch, because he kind of just like says what he fucking wants to say. And like there's this moment where I think it's Naomi Watts where she like opens up the box and the camera like fucking zooms straight into the darkness. I'm like, that's such a playful decision where you can just think like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna playfully do, like, there's so many of those crafted moments that I'm like, I can just see the giddy little, this is what we're gonna do, you know? And if you know anything about Lynch's later life, where he's just like making fucking wood carvings in his garage and painting and shit like that, you're like, yeah, the guy just wants to create fun things based on inspiration that strikes, and that's beautiful.
There's also something to that moment that recalls what Henry was saying about there being a sort of illusion. There's a magic trick at play that like the script says she vanishes, and yet like we're focused on the box, and there is just like a little bit of sleight of hand of like, well, I can't actually make her disappear. That seems weird and anticlimactic, or it seems, whatever, staid and stupid. The way that Naomi Watts disappears is phenomenal.
We disappear.
Like, that she just kind of like faces the closet, and then the camera just subtly frames her out, and by the time the other character turns around, like, she's just gone. But then, the camera zooming into the box, closing it out, and then the box falling into frame essentially with her gone is just, it's so simple and so elegant, and it conveys a complex idea once again with simplicity and elegance. I think, Austin, to tag what you were saying, this is something I have felt more and more acutely over the past few years, especially as I've had more opportunities to direct stuff and put my own interests and passions and my own kind of creative DNA on screen. I think we have a tendency as audiences to look for reason and meaning and profundity, not necessarily where they don't exist, but sometimes, occasionally, where nothing more than like impulse and fetish exists. Where like, and certainly that DNA can string within the same thematic frequency. But there are so many times when I watch a Lynch movie where I'm just like, okay, does this mean something deeper? Or is he just really into this type of stuff? Is he really into jitterbugging dancers? Yeah. Is he really into just like big bouffants and kind of rockabilly bullshit? Like, it is just stuff like that where it's like the two aren't mutually exclusive, but there are a lot of moments in this film especially, and I don't say this to the film's detriment, because I do think at the end of the day, like, an artist should express what they want to express if they have that privilege. Like, it's that great James Cameron soundbite where I think in a recent interview or roundtable or something like that about Avatar: The Way of Water, he was saying like, yeah, some folks from the studio had asked me like, well, does this sequence really need to go on this long? Like, we get the point. Why do we need to do it? And he's like, well, we need to do it because I want to see it. Like,
Yeah.
that's kind of the point of the thing, is like to satisfy my own artistic urge.
Also,
And if I want
why
to see it, there's probably a lot of people in the audience who would also like to luxuriate in this
or
imagery.
that we want to be taken on a journey from the
100%.
perspective of somebody else who has an interesting artistic impulse. Like, this is the reason why I think artists, I don't know if I'm going to make some grand pontificating statement about like the role of artists and fully mean it, but I'm going to partly mean it, which is that I think that the true artistic impulse is an impulse that exists prior to, let's say, intellectual interpretation. And what I mean by that is there's something, especially when it is this impulsive, like you're talking about, Raymond, whether it's like, I just like this stuff, whether it just comes from this instinctual, impulsive, immediate need to just say it, right? Now, of course, there's fucking psychoanalytic reasons for it and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah,
But
sure.
I want to see the world through the lens of somebody who's like, I love psychobilly culture. And I spent my childhood going and listening to Reverend Horton Heat and whoever the fuck else. And then they just make a character that just lives in that world. Or a movie that takes place at some sort of like fucking psychobilly festival in Southern Orange County. That's fun, man. Like, that's interesting, you know? They really love Mike Ness and Social Distortion, and so they want to fucking, like, do some sort of, like, punkabilly, rockabilly. Like, who cares? I love that shit. Or tattoo culture, or fucking someone that likes to wear bathrobes when they're live streaming. I don't know. Like, fucking just shine your lens on something, and then don't worry about condescending to the audience in a way that deludes or washes over that weird, nuanced specificity.
And because all of that stuff is so firmly in the DNA of not just the art but the artist, like people will project meaning onto it. And that's, again, not to say that the meaning isn't there, but sometimes like there are things that are expressed impulsively that you can't kind of like. This happened, on the project that I was just shooting, where like we're doing this kind of complex setup and whatever, and after a couple takes, the actor steps aside and asks me, he's just like, I really appreciate what you're doing here, how it ties into this, that, and the other. I was like, well, I'm so glad you figured that out for me, because like, once again, I'm just over here like, no, it would just look better. Like, it would feel better.
Right.
Like, I don't know exact, like, there's not necessarily an intellectual
That's a
process
honed,
to 100%
that's a
of
honed
it.
skill. That's a
It's
honed
just one of
skill.
those. Yeah, it's just one of those things where like you are creating an ecosystem in which these
Yes.
ideas are interacting and creating this unique friction. And so things will like naturally coalesce in ways that are, again, like thematically appropriate. And I think Lynch is quietly and perhaps cheekily sort of the king of that, of just like so many of his projects where it feels like it's stripped so cleanly and succinctly from his id and projected onto the screen. Like, it all holds together. It all holds together because there is like a purity of vision. There's a distillation to it. Like, especially when you consider, look at Eraserhead, all the stuff that takes place in the radiator, the woman performing in there with the chipmunk cheeks, that stuff was added well after the movie was finished. Like, he was like, yeah, we need to like add some more stuff. And there's a part where Jack Nance is kind of looking at the radiator in a weird way, and he's like, I don't know, somebody might be in there. But like when he does it, it doesn't feel like it's crowbarred into the movie. It
But
feels
the
like
reason
it's
is because
part of a greater whole.
he trusts his impulse and he knows the world that he's built. So it's like there is a marrying of that kind of like larger ecosystemic understanding, but also I think when we say like, when we talk about like a director that like had such a deft hand or such a clear vision or whatever, I think what we're saying is this. We're saying that they did a very great job of marrying that artistic impulse and the instinct with the larger framework. And then when you get that, anything you fit into it is at least approximately right. Now, it might not all fit, and at the end of the day, you do want to kind of like do a little bonsai tree trimming and make it a little bit more sculpted. But nevertheless, your impulse, if married to a larger understanding of that larger ecosystem, they will get married up if you have honed the skills to do that. And I think that, to me, then, is what we call like a deft hand or a clear vision or something like that when we do praise a creative.
There is a brief anecdote that this reminds me of that when I was a kid, my first job was running the scoreboard for my grade school's basketball and volleyball games. And this is like basketball games from like 5th grade up through 8th grade, like, just that range. Like kids who are sort of, it's about team building. It's not about like winning and whatever, but you get it. And there was a guy who went to my high school, who was, in his day, he was like Mr. Ohio basketball. Like I can't remember exactly what the title is, but he was Ohio's Mr. Basketball. Like each state anoints some senior every year or whatever. Yeah. Like a great athlete, had a good college career, never played professionally, but he was like an absurdly talented basketball player. And he was coaching his son, who was in like 5th or 6th grade when I was running the scoreboard. And there was, before halftime, there was like 4 seconds on the clock, and I watched his son, who played point guard, get the ball, and because I'm right there, center court, watching it, I can see his son gets the ball. The first thing he does as he's putting down the first dribble is look at the scoreboard, just like a quick glimpse at it, and then I could see his lips counting down the rest of the 4 or 5 seconds. Oh. As he dribbles, he breaks the defense, he gets to half court, and he steadies himself. He knows exactly how much time he has. He knows exactly how many steps he can take before he has to launch to get it off before the buzzer. He reaches just about half court and puts up a beautifully calculated shot that hits nothing but net. And then he just like walked over to the bench without it. Like, he wasn't acting like a kid about it. He was acting like he had been there before.
And today, that person is Anthony Edwards from the Minnesota.
I don't want to use their names for their own privacy, because I don't know where they are now or whatever. I know for a fact he's not playing professionally, but I do remember sitting back and just thinking to myself, like, you cannot teach that, or if you can teach it, it's not intentional. Like you can develop all of those skills, but you cannot teach that instinct, that sort of like court sense that he has. Like that's something that is like.
Do you think you can hone? Do you think you can hone that craft?
Oh, certainly you can. Yeah. Like there are some people who are just born with certain talents, and they spend their life, for such as it is, honing those abilities. Like some people are born with latent abilities that others are not. Some people are more athletic than others, or whatever. This is a Spielberg thing that like people talk about, how like when he walks on set, he has the actors just rehearse the piece. He goes through, they sort of talk through blocking a little bit, but he more or less lets the actors sort of feel it out and dictate where they're going to be and when. And then once he has seen them do it, he's just like, okay, I know how to shoot this thing. Like, you go here, you go here, you go here. And he absolutely had like a latent gift for filmmaking that, he nurtured and developed over time. But he was not able to do that on like Sugarland Express or Jaws. He's only able to do that after he's made like 30, 40, 50 years worth of movies, and has like so ingrained, like he can probably close his eyes and imagine your face, Austin, at different focal lengths. Like the guy's just been doing it so long and has such facility with it. But undoubtedly that all sprang from like the kind of talent that he spent his entire life nurturing and developing.
Do you think that, so then the kind of larger, like why, like obviously we know that like the whole idea of something being Lynchian has taken on a mind of its own, and it might mean certain things, but I think that the reason is because we do praise the genius of certain creatives. We have historically, whether it's Leonardo or Michelangelo, or whether it's like some fucking early 20 late 19th century theater director, early 20th century, like it could be in the world of fine art, sculpture, whatever. Like, what is it that you think someone like a David Lynch has that would give him this elevated status of being like a genius? And do you think, is there something about like artistic genius? Is it just simply that we love to see the world from the perspective of like a cohesive, odd angle on the world, and someone that can do that in a way that's compelling is what we then call genius? Like, what do you think about this discussion?
Oh, I'll say in brief, watching his movies, I'm always reminded of the Orson Welles bit that like he always said about Citizen Kane, that like the reason that movie's as good as it is because I didn't know what I couldn't do. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it was his first movie. He had worked in radio. Like the only limitations, at least in his mind, was his mind. It was his imagination. So when he would tell Greg Toland, like, no, the camera has to be lower. We have to be seeing up at the guy. Greg Toland is like, okay, so then we have to like break through the floor and put the camera down there. And he's like, okay, do that.
Yeah, we're gonna have
Like,
to cover the top of the set with fabric so that
exactly.
it looks like there's a ceiling because movies don't
Yeah,
don't shoot like
precisely.
this. Yeah.
And and there's a little bit of that every time I watch Lynch's films, is like, oh, this is a guy who like his first movie, this movie, his last film, this is a guy who never learned what he wasn't allowed to do. Like, and there's kind of an enthralling element to that where you're always just like, no, he's going to do literally whatever impulse he has, whatever the creative instinct is, like he's going to pursue it, even and in ways that like, yeah, maybe 100% of them don't pan out, but like 90% of them, other filmmakers wouldn't let themselves pursue. They wouldn't give themselves the permission. Whereas I feel like he is all green flags. When he has an idea, he's going to pursue it.
I find it
Mm.
interesting you frame it in terms of giving himself permission because I feel what it is that Lynch excels at and why he's became a descriptor in name itself is because sure, Blue Velvet's a movie about recognizing there's all kinds of dirty stuff swept under the rug in American culture, and there's, this obsession with youth that's kind of an insistent lie that's just barely held together at the seams. But he knows how to convey that sense of everything swept under the rug about to come out bursting on a technical level in the design and editing and presentation of like the media itself. The sound design gets uncomfortable in a way where it's like, well, typically that's not supposed to happen, and there's all these little small kind of tricks of like things that aren't supposed to happen in typical traditional like formal movie storytelling that really get you like broken minded about form in the same way he's asking you to consider what he's saying as far as like the social contract being dirty or perhaps written on yellower paper than you may have first realized. You just got to look really closely at the parchment.
No, that's a good way of putting it. The manner in which, I'm so fond of citing this, but Guillermo del Toro talks about like, when people come up to me and my cinematographer and say like, "Oh, that movie was so well shot. The cinematography was great." What I hear is,
I
"Well, the
noticed.
cinematography was great, and the production design was great, and the wardrobe was great, and the lighting was great, and the acting was great." Because like, moving camera from A to B, it's 100% entirely about what is in front of the lens, and I think you're right about that. That Lynch has a way of creating like you said, essentially this biosphere that is like,
Mm.
it's recognizable but uncanny. There is something indescribably off about his worlds,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that is what gives so much of the image its power. It's not necessarily that's the beauty of film, is that it is everything all at once. It is the lens, it is the lighting, it is the production design, it is the performances, it is the dialogue, etc., etc.
It's why I constantly. Oh yeah, go ahead,
I was
Henry.
just gonna say a scene not from Mulholland Drive, but from Lynch's filmography that really nails this for me is in Fire Walk with Me. There's a scene where two detectives are sitting in a bar or in a diner drinking coffee, and it's kind of a parody of a regular Twin Peaks TV show scene in which they're all sitting at the diner enjoying themselves, having a happy time. This is an absolutely miserable time in Fire Walk with Me. These two detectives there are sitting there in silence, sipping coffee. There's a light in the back, far back of the frame. There's a light just flickering. It's just a busted light flickering. It is very unpleasant. If this were a real world situation, patrons in this diner would have pointed it out, asked for something to be done. It's very annoying. At least turn it off. But everybody's just kind of operating in this diner as regular patrons while the building's literally falling apart, and it's very uncomfortable to see just on a skin crawling level. And I think that again, it's just. You realize something's off. You realize things are being swept under the rug. And it's not just saying like society is sick, but it's feeling like we're within the belly of a dying animal.
Let me jump in with some deep philosophical nerdery now.
For it.
Okay? All right. So I had a moment a few years ago that unlocked for me when I was trying to figure out, like, because I do this all the time. You know, I've got a PhD in philosophy. And like I spent years reading like just fucking obscure academic articles or obscure texts. And of course, some that are intended for popular consumption. But one of the challenges that, you know, especially friends of mine and colleagues of mine have always struggled with is like, how does this matter? Like do metaphysics fucking matter? And so I've always kind of been like, okay, like, are there any keys in any of these texts or ideas that can help us unlock some things? And there's a key in the texts of the work of Gilles Deleuze and in his work with Deleuze and Guattari that I think really help shed some light on this. And this goes back to the conversation that started with what Raymond said about Guillermo del Toro, and that finishes up with what Henry was saying about like this diner scene. And it's this idea that, and I've always tried to impress this upon my students too. And then of course actors, they don't give a shit about this kind of height theory stuff. They just want to like, how do I win an award? How do I book the next job? They just want to book the next fucking job. And I'm like, okay, but like I've got these like high level things that I'm always trying to figure out how to communicate. And one of the ways I'll talk about it is that like Deleuze and Guattari talk about this thing that they call machinic assemblage. And so I'm just going to, for the sake of simplicity, just talk about like, let's just talk about like a network, or as Raymond mentioned earlier, an ecosystem, right? So if a film is viewed as a network or an ecosystem, that means that there are many, 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 many different parts within that system that inform and that reinforce each other. Now, let's just go with the ecosystem metaphor. Some of those components are less essential than others, you know? Like the fucking random butt hair on the beaver that's swimming in the creek is probably less important than the beaver's mouth or the beaver as a whole body. Or let's just keep talking about beavers. The beaver's teeth.
I like the notion of breaking down the food chain into constituent parts of each individual animal. It's like,
yeah.
Well, we all know we can't lose beavers, but we can probably lose their fur.
Butt hair. No, one butt hair. One butt hair is probably inconsequential. But the fur as a whole, or like its internal respiratory system, then you have the waterways, the kind of like upstream fountain that feeds that pond, like whatever. We know all the different, there's many different component parts, right, to an ecosystem. Some of the components are less essential and some are more integral. Some are going to have a larger sized contributing element and some are going to have less. So maybe the director has an outsized involvement in the ecosystem of film. Then maybe the PA. But if you've ever been on a fucking set, and especially a big fucking set, and you don't have a goddamn PA that's like running traffic and fucking making sure that people are getting from A to B, and where's the fucking person that you're looking, and they're gonna fucking, like, you need that shit. The machinery kind of requires all of these different component parts that work together. I think that's a really interesting way of thinking about it, because then when you look at a film, you're looking at a machinic assemblage. You are looking at this process that has all of these different component parts. And I think it's actually really important, especially for creatives, to not think that any one of those are necessarily more important. Now, I'm not saying that we don't know that, but I don't think it does us any good to be like, well, a makeup artist is interchangeable with another makeup artist. Or, like Raymond and I were just talking this week about like lean crews and how could you build a lean crew for certain things. And he was like, well, I think you need to have this and you need to have this. And those things are essential based on,
It depends depending on the movie.
based on the project.
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
But that's what I mean. It's all about the fit for the ecosystem of that thing. Just like the beaver's ecosystem is different than the urban ecosystem, which is different than the arid ecosystem, which is different than the ecosystem within the ecosystem within the, you know what I mean? There's scales in this thing, but what's important is that none of them are driven by like, this is why auteur theory is something that I value, but I also am a little bit, I want to push back just a little bit or qualify some things a little bit, because it takes a village when you're trying to make a goddamn movie.
Yes, it does, but I also think that criticism of auteur theory is predicated on a misreading of auteur theory.
I'm answering the misreading that not the actual cahiers de cinema and what they were talking about when
in much the same way that like method acting went from doing emotional recall to like staying in character
for
and
3 weeks,
yelling at the crew or whatever.
Yeah.
There's been a sort of like definition creep over time to like what auteur theory is, where like I agree wholeheartedly with auteur theory as it was first posited and advanced by the Cahiers de Cinema boys, that like anyone who's seen a fucking Tim Burton or Wes Anderson movie can't not believe that a director does put something of their own personality on a project, right?
Yeah, even older, like with a Truffaut or an Ozu, like it's clearly
100%. 100%. The reason I bring up Wes Anderson and Tim Burton is that I think they are the starter pack auteurs if you are trying to explain to someone without in the fastest way possible, like what does a director do, you could kind of put on one of their movies and be like, well, they tell everyone to make this. Like, it's kind of what happens. Guillermo del Toro is probably another one of those guys.
But here's the thing. But like you said, without a cinematographer, without an art department, without a production, without a fucking model, Tim Burton, without someone to do the fucking models, those network effects only are potential, and this is where the Deleuze-Guattari element comes in. They're only potentials that need to be actualized. And so the network, as everything all put together, or the assemblage as all put together, only has efficacy insofar as it's actualized from potential, and the feedback, the connection goes through all of them. It might have more of an outsized reliance on the director's vision, but it's only ever put in potentia, and it's actualized through the network.
The director knows
the safest place for your ships is in the harbor, but they won't make you any money. And in much the same way, the movie is never better than when it is in your brain, and like. That to me is once again the beauty and the magic of cinema is like essentially, in some cases bringing a literal village, not in the like proverbial sense, but a literal town's worth of people together for the realization of like a shared vision. Like there's something so like fucking beautiful and chaotic about that. Like it just, I'm so fond of that quote. I can't remember who dropped it, that like every film is a document of its own making. And I always think of like Fitzcarraldo as like, yeah, this is making a movie. Like this is what it means to make a movie. Like you get a bunch of people together to do something that is A, potentially impossible, and B, potentially pointless. And by the end of it, you are like united in your struggle and like in the validation and the satisfaction of creating or accomplishing something beautiful negates or renders worthy 100% of the blood, sweat, tears, etc. And that I think is like, again, that's the alchemy of the art form, is just like, it's almost, fuck, man, it's almost cult-like in a way of just like, getting a bunch of people who truly believe in the power of this thing, not just an individual film, but the idea of film
Exactly.
as an art form, to like stand around and just try to conjure it. Like this is
Mhm.
something that I told the actors on the last day of shooting, where I was just like, I often think of making a movie as like a seance. You have this
Mhm.
brief window to conjure into existence these people whom you love, these characters, these, these personalities. And not only was I thanking them for being such, graceful and excellent and willing conduits for those characters, but also just expressing that, like, this is it. Like, this, I not only am I grateful that you guys brought these people to life, but also, like, whatever they're worth to you, you're also gonna have to say goodbye.
Mhm.
And I just think there's something so fucking beautiful about that, that like we have this moment to like capture as much of these imagined lives as we possibly can, and we hope to imbue them with all the depth and richness of actual lives. And that is like, whether it's a magic trick, Henry, or the way that I would describe it is like, it's alchemy. Like it's there's something mythological about it, and I don't think we will ever tire of witnessing that, and Mulholland Drive is as good of any an interpretation or a representation of that, of just like, yeah, this is singularly realized in a way that does feel like every great song, the first time you hear it, it sounds familiar. And
Yeah,
watching this
it's
movie, you're like, there is something elemental about this. I've never seen it before, but it feels familiar. If it's speaking to something within me that you cannot fully wring out.
the closest thing I'd relate it to, honestly, is Sunset Boulevard, in the sense that,
Mm, mm, mm.
it's Lynch's fascination with the whole kind of like doomed starlet, failed star kind of. Uh, but beyond that, like the American obsession with celebrity, and kind of, everybody in their
Yes,
mind thinking like, oh, I could have made it big in X, Y, and Z, be it,
that's
movies,
right.
sports, whatever. I don't know. It's that nugget of like self delusion that I think makes it more than just kind of like Hollywood navel gazing or cinematic, self masturbation, in the sense that, like, oh, look what we can do with all these tricks. Like, I think it
But it
utilizes
also
all those
still
tricks to
does.
hit at that again, that I could have been the one, that larger
eh,
social
But
kind of vibe.
but 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 I come away from this film also still thinking like maybe this is the delusion, but you're like, but no, it is still possible. Like the
Right.
dream, the dream is still a beautiful dream,
Even in
you
like,
know?
yeah, in like unlocking the mystery, like, you think, I get the movie, does that mean I would, like, I'm not gonna fail? Like, I saw Mulholland Drive,
Yeah,
I know what to watch out for, I know how not to think. Like, it
that's so
still
funny.
entices you with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's so. This is where you can definitely do like the real show me the meaning. Like it's so part and parcel of a certain type of American optimism as well. You know,
Mm.
like there is something that is integral to the dream, the celebrity dream, that I think is a very 20th century, especially later 20th century. I remember like I got a couple fun little anecdotes, but like I remember seeing, I don't know if it was like a VH1 Behind the Music or something like that back in the day, but like Tony Braxton apparently. Do you guys remember Tony Braxton, the R&B singer from
Oh,
the
of course.
90s?
Yeah.
Like apparently she was discovered, I think it was her, discovered like in a garage in a gas station bathroom, and she was just like singing to herself, and a music producer happened to be there and was like, "Oh my god, I'm going to turn you into a star." And she became a star, right? And you hear these fucking stories and you're like, "God, that's all I need." And as somebody who has been in countless auditions, even for projects like big fucking movies where you're like, man, if I just get in on that, like if that's the one, you have the meeting with the guy who runs the studio, and you're like, this is the meeting, and then you don't get it, but it's like, but they keep you on the hook because it's the next one, and it's the promise of, what, like we're gonna get the next meeting, and then the next one, and it is a really kind of like toxic pattern to get sucked into, but it does keep the fucking train moving.
And it's so easy to just believe, no, there's just a man in a shadowy room up there who hates me. Like, that's why I'm getting denied things.
Yeah, that's right. And as long as I can like purge my demons, then it's very religious in that sense. You know, it's like, well, if I just do the right fucking things, then the gods will bestow their blessings upon me. And we hear, and this is why I think listening to actors is always like not a good thing unless they're like really good at communicating their craft, because it's like honestly, the amount of luck and timing or connections that most of us in anything that we do that is successful, the amount of that stuff that contributes to whatever successes you have is like you can't quantify it and you can't even communicate. So, you know, when people are like, man, you just got to put your head down and work hard. And I journaled every day and I studied the human experience. And that's how I understand the depths of humanity. And I can access it. Maybe do the fucking work too. But also, like, I'm just not sure there's any sort of secret sauce to this thing.
Yeah, you bring up the spiritual aspects of like maybe you're not going to escape samsara doing that, dude. Maybe you're gonna just you're gonna keep on trying. You're just you need to figure out what you're doing wrong at auditions or figure out something else.
Yeah,
That's one of
well,
the things about the ending of the film
Uh-huh.
that sort of, in some ways, kind of claws it away from being exclusively about that dream interpretation
Hmm.
of just like, no, I mean, there is a tiny little beautiful place called Hollywood where a bunch of identical people are struggling toward the same
Yep.
identical dream, and there is just like, yeah, maybe the dream theory does hold a bit more water, but also like you can just read it literally. And
Yeah.
it's like,
yeah.
yeah,
And
it's fucking devastating.
And again, to hear that the movie, plot twist, it's all a dream. Oh man, how hackneyed and like done. But then to watch the movie and to see like, okay, it was a dream, but in being a dream, what that tells us about this character's like delusions and like self-image
It,
and all that good
it
stuff. It's
doesn't
like there's so much
doesn't
more.
undermine the movie in this instance, because what it does is it opens us up to a very real human, and this is where the kind of David Lynch's own curiosity with human consciousness and the human experience shines through so greatly, is that it is a sort of musing upon who we are, what we desire. And as somebody who spent his entire life deep in meditation, with TM, and it's a very mantra approach to detachment. He obviously would have valued the idea of not being completely overly determined by desire, right? Like that is one of the hallmarks of all post post Vedic or post Hindu approaches to spirituality is a release from the suffering that comes from attachment and desire. And so there's something clearly in this that is an exploration of the things that do keep us trapped in the cycle of samsara, as you were just talking about,
Yeah, I
Henry.
mean, for you to talk about desire, I think about the scene near the end where she's like cry masturbating over all that's happened and just, forever hung up on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's fucking wind it down. We got one episode left after this. We're gonna do a mailbag episode. Do we even have enough fucking emails? Have people even been asking us anything? Or are we just gonna talk shit
I have
for
not
an hour and a
checked the box. I do want to bring up, because it was mentioned at least twice in the chat, there is a short film, The Meshes of the Afternoon. Apparently, it's an
Oh yeah.
influence on Mulholland Drive. I'm not familiar.
I
Okay.
haven't seen it, but it's one of those movies that is cited as an influence by a lot of filmmakers.
Gotcha.
Who directed it?
Let me look it up.
It is it's Maya Deren. Famed experimental filmmaker Maya Deren, who did a bunch of short films. One I'm particularly fond of called Witch's Cradle. But Meshes of the Afternoon, I've heard about a lot as one of those, like, maybe folks watch it in film school, like kind of put it on. But that one often gets cited as like, yeah, as is so often the case. Uh, a lot of those sort of short or experimental or underground films end up kind of like leaking their way upward and sort of infecting the mainstream in really interesting ways, while the Maya Darens of the world and Stan Brackages of the world maybe never get the uh, the what's the word, the credit or the consideration that their disciples do.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. Ken Anger would be another one that I would
Yeah,
say, who just
absolutely.
recently passed. But yeah,
Your Dog Starmans, your Scorpio Risings, all that stuff. Like, um, Scorsese talks about how Scorpio Rising was like a foundational text for him. That's Kenneth Anger. Um, and I think certainly if you know of like short or experimental or underground filmmakers, Kenneth Anger is probably one of the names near the top of that particular list, just also because of Hollywood Babylon and the sort of like reputation that precedes that. Um, but it is still it is one of those things. It's always kind of interesting that the real pioneers are always seemingly on the margins.
you know what?
That's not to say that Scorsese's not a pioneer. Certainly he is, but he's drawing from influences and inspirations as much as any other filmmaker is.
I wanna give a shout then to a YouTube channel. I mean, he's only got 480 subscribers. Let's boost this guys. Let's boost this fucking thing up over 1,000. Okay. His name is Stephen Broomer. He's an academic of film studies, but he started a theory called art. He started a YouTube channel called Art and Trash. And basically, it's video essays on the underground, avant-garde, and then like all kind of weird, short, experimental things. It's named after Pauline Kael's Trash Art in the Movies, where he's kind of doing these presentation video essays, and sometimes he just like hosts events. I can't remember. I think is he British? He might be British. So if he's in the UK, I think he hosts events too. He's a university professor, but it's Art and Trash, and a lot of these like early experimental or even contemporary experimental and avant-garde pieces can be accessed there through like a nice little accessible video essay thing. I know him through kind of the nerdy, this is what I'm talking about. These nerdy fucking academics that like have these brilliant ideas and great little projects that only 480 people are subscribing. Let's shout it out to the world, okay?
Yeah. I'm
Follow that fucking thing. He's great.
I'm sharing the channel in chat for some reason. I can't share the URL, but the username's at Art and Trash 095. But yeah, for some reason it's
6095. Art and Trash 6095.
chat. Yeah, for some reason I cannot interact with the chat. Oh, I need to. Sorry. Go ahead and continue on.
No. While we're getting that out there for the chat, I will say, just as we're winding down, let's just spare a few more minutes of discussion for the late great David Lynch. Recently deceased after a great life and a brilliant career. This was something that kind of felt natural. I know when we first closed the book on Show Me the Meaning, we very sort of cheekily decided to go with The Last Picture Show. It seemed kind of obvious at a certain point. I feel like in a weird way, this was just as, if not more so, an appropriate or fitting conclusion for a conversation about movies, their making, their meaning, etc. And I feel like we kind of, maybe we stepped backward into that. It was really just one of those things where we were like, well, we should do a Lynch, right? Like, let's talk about the man. And this kind of just, without us really intending, feels like, yeah, we have one more episode, but this is the last one where we're covering one individual movie. And there is something to this film that, not only because it takes place in the film industry, and kind of has those sort of, meta narratives that are sort of stacking on top of each other throughout it, there's also just something so weirdly apocalyptic about it. Like, and that's not me trying to end on like a low or dismal note, although certainly things are lower and more dismal than they were when we first wrapped up the show a few years ago. Um, but it just is like, yeah, I was sitting there watching it, and as it was wrapping up, I was just thinking like, well, I would hate for us to come back next week and be like, yeah, anyway, let's talk about Saturday Night now streaming on Peacock. Like, what? Where else do you go after something that is this like that is this singular and this well realized?
Honestly, when you were earlier talking just about the seance aspects of a movie, it was really reminding me what I love about Robert Altman, particularly McCabe and Mrs. Miller, with the way it takes advantage of the snowstorm that occurred while shooting.
Oh,
Mm,
sure. Yeah,
mm.
using the environment and like
Building the
folding the
whole
world into
town. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. But this
Mm.
funny enough, this is something that um weirdly kind of like followed us to Minnesota. My cinematographer and I drove from LA to Minnesota because there was a bunch of stuff that we didn't want to put on a plane for like security reasons, like prosthetics and blood and all kinds of stuff like that, where we were like, we could check it all, or we maybe should just drive it because if the airline loses any of that stuff, we're screwed. And it was just a hassle we didn't want. But when he passed away, his widow requested that any of his fans, take 10 minutes of silence to meditate and, engage in this practice that brought so much meaning and I would assume a lot of focus and a lot of peace to his life. And it just so happened that 10 minutes to fall when we were on sort of like the home stretch on our drive there. We were maybe like 3 or 4 hours away from location, and we pulled over and just like pulled to the side of the road right by this big frozen field in the middle of nowhere, Minnesota. And we took 10 minutes for the man, and it was one of those things where like we didn't have to talk about it afterwards. It was a nice quiet moment for us to not only reflect on what his work meant to us and to others and to the development of this beautiful art form over the years, but it was also just kind of like, for me at least, this great moment to sort of center myself and, to bring it back to the beginning of the conversation, Austin, to like acknowledge the shoulders on which we stand and to really like reflect on how much we've taken from the David Lynch's of the world and how much of his work, not that we take his work for granted necessarily, but in much the same way that like, you know, there are things that Hitchcock introduces in his filmography that have just now become such accepted parts of visual language that he doesn't even get credit for them anymore. Like I think there's stuff in David Lynch's DNA that has really like I can't imagine Darren Aronofsky existing without David Lynch. Like you can trace the lines, the influence that he's had to filmmakers who have gone on and made their own names. And I don't think, while there are a lot of great filmmakers, I don't think there are that many that you could so firmly trace the legacy of. And that to me makes David Lynch like he's one of one, as we said on our Eraserhead episode over on Cinemythology. Like he is a singular voice, and he will be missed.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I referred to Mulholland Drive as a glossary earlier, and it's just like, thank you for the language, David. It's allowed us through our art to kind of construct new sentences and look at things new ways. Just very grateful for that. It's one of the first. He was one of the first auteur directors I really discovered as a teenager, and really got me understanding film as more than just like a linear means of delivering narrative.
And if I can then spin that into a sort of charge that I would want to lay, this is Uncle Austin now coming back, a charge that I can lay at the feet of people listening is be bold, trust your instincts, hone your craft, like put in the fucking work, yes, but also trust yourself. Don't condescend to the market. Now, I'm not saying that you're not aware of like what a good story is based on pre-existing things that have existed in the market, but don't merely condescend to the market. Robert McKee says that that's called being a hack. So don't be a fucking hack with your vision. Don't condescend to the market. You know, trust your instinct, cultivate your curiosity, find things that are intriguing and interesting, and be weird. It's okay. You know, be weird, and please share it with us. Now, of course, cultivate love and acceptance and opening, and be self-critical and challenge yourselves and your biases and your bigotries and all the shit that makes our world shitty. Of course, but fucking let your weirdness be shared with people, and cultivate that depth and that growth, because you know what? It's fucking beautiful, and we see that, and it doesn't mean that we're all going to be David Lynch's, and that's okay. Some of us are the butt hairs on the beaver in the fucking ecosystem. And that is okay. It's like that metaphor in the Bible where it's like the body of Christ kind of thing, and like not everyone is the eye and not everyone is the nose. Some of us are the fucking butt hair. And that is okay, because on that particular body, that butt hair is part of that body. So be the fucking butt hair to the best that you can possibly be, okay? I hope y'all are following my metaphor here. Mad love to all my fellow butt hairs out there, okay?
And before we wrap up, just one more throw to the mailbag, since that is our final episode next week. If you have any last cues to any last discussion prompts, anything at all, wisecrack.smtm@gmail.com. Send them that way, and we're gonna churn through as many of those as we can next week. But I think we'll have a good time. It'll be a nice loosey goosey kind of fun little hang.
I definitely have a question I want to ask the both of you. Stay tuned.
Looking forward to it. So yeah, we will be streaming.
You might
again
have
next
to have
week.
more than one, Henry. I don't know how many people are.
Maybe.
If nobody else is sending them in, we'll be streaming it again next week for the final episode, Tuesday, 5 p.m. Pacific time. Again, that is our final episode. But for our final movie ep, I can't state it more plainly. I think this weirdly, secretly, accidentally ended up being kind of a perfect text to end on. This is as rich as anything we've ever discussed together, and you know, I'll save the tears for next week, gentlemen. But it's been a real pleasure doing this with the both of you, even though we only got to do it for a little while. This was a blast as always. So let's wrap things up, and maybe you know what? Let's end with 10 minutes of transcendental meditation. Everyone, just be quiet. Bow your heads, shut your eyes, and whatever you do.
If you're driving,
do not turn off this live stream. They might still keep us around. this is our last chance. Send it to everybody. Grind the numbers up. We gotta get as many people watching as possible.
Yeah. Do we have any hackers out there? Can you please boost the algorithm? Can you can you fudge with our numbers? Something? No.
But rest in peace, David Lynch, and we will see all of you again next week. Take care, everybody.
Later.
See you in a week.